I have to say, I did not notice this the first service, but I love that. Our mission is to nurture spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion. I assume you didn't put that up for me, but I gotta say, that's nice. I'm gonna take a picture of that before I leave. You guys are gonna make my Twitter feed today. Thank you for having me today. I want to start by sharing a story. And this is the story brought to us by Julissa Catalan about her mother. She tells us, "My mother was abandoned by her mother at 8 years old. Married by 18, 5 children by 25, and with only an 8th grade level education, my mother was jailed for a month after attempting to cross the Mexican border into the United States. She illegally and successfully crossed the border on her second try 2 years later. This is her story. It was 1970 in Guatemala. To say my mother lived in poverty is an understatement. Her ultimate low point, however, was when she could no longer produce breast milk to feed her 3-month-old son. He was number 5 of the children she had back to back. My mother rationed the little she had, but the money wasn't coming in. Her husband would tell her that although he was always working, his boss would not pay him. One day, out of desperation, she went directly to her husband's boss, begging for his earnings so that she could buy milk for her starving baby. The boss threw 1 quetzal, which I'm told is the equivalent of 13 cents, at her and told her not to return. She was humiliated, and in that moment she vowed never to ask anyone, not even her husband, for money again. Instead, she went to work, washing single men's clothes, cleaning houses, and selling wealthy people's garbs. Like many mothers, all she wanted in life was for her children to have everything she didn't, particularly an education and financial stability. Now, a few weeks later, the opportunity toward the American dream presented itself. A group of her friends, 6 women and 2 men, were planning on immigrating to the U.S. together, and she decided to join them. My mom left her baby and toddlers with my grandmother, promising to come back for them. The trajectory began by bus, from Guatemala City to Chiapas, Mexico. From there, they took another bus to the Distrito Federal. They attempted to get visas to the U.S. while in Mexico's capital, but they were, of course, denied. The group continued their bus journey to Tijuana. It was there where they met the coyotes that would bring them across the border for $100 each. As the group made their way through the hills, dodging panning spotlights along the way, she felt a coyote tugging at her, making her walk slower than the others. Eventually, it was just the 2 of them. He tried to rape her. My mother screamed until her friends ahead heard. One of them was in the process of climbing over an electric wire. But when he heard the yelling, he turned back and ran toward her. As he did, he touched the wire, signaling immigration enforcement. Within minutes, helicopters and police cars surrounded the area. They were transported to Chula Vista and jailed for a month. While incarcerated, my mother became very ill. Parasites were found in her stomach. She fell into a coma for 4 days. She was kept isolated since she was highly contagious. As soon as she regained consciousness, she was released early and transported back to Guatemala. For the next 2 years, she continued to work and raise her kids just as she always had. Then she was approached with an opportunity to make the trek north once more. Her second attempt at crossing the border was with her younger brother, and this time the coyotes' rate had gone up to $250 per person. The group consisted of 13 men and 2 women. they made it into California. An old friend of hers worked in LA and got her a job as a live-in housekeeper in Sherman Oaks. She stayed there for 3 months, earning, wait for it, $30 a week. She later made her way to New Jersey, and with the help of her sister and other immigrant housekeepers, found consistent work and a boss to sponsor her residency. She saved enough money to keep her promise and bring my brothers and sisters over. Today, Julisa's siblings are business owners or licensed professionals. Her mother, along with her youngest son, owns a commercial cleaning business. At 74, she is now a U.S. citizen. While well past retirement age, she still works 7 days a week. There are many stories that we can tell. Some end well, some do not. But whether we are talking about Julisa's mother, or the dreamers who are standing up for their rights, or the children migrants from Central America who travel thousands of miles alone by foot and rail car to get here, many immigrants in our country have demonstrated great courage in their daily lives and continue to do so. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we affirm our core values that guide us in responding to these injustices that we see around immigration. Primary among these is the sanctity of the human person, which should be recognized and supported by the public and private institutions that make up our society. Our principles affirm the opportunity of each person to participate fully, socially, economically, and legally in the communities of which that person is a part. Further, our shared humanity knows no borders. The bonds between and among all people transcend cultures and ethnic identities. For Unitarian Universalists, the common life we share is precious and holy. And we work to nourish community among all persons so that each of us can reach our full human stature. We are inspired to live these core values by religious teachers and traditions that call us to respond to divine love by loving our neighbors and welcoming the stranger. The lives of prophetic individuals call us to challenge the structures of oppression by working for justice and compassion, the public expressions of that love. And it takes courage to do that work. We can go back days, decades, and centuries in our Unitarian Universalist history and find examples of great courage. In 1553, Michael Servetus was burned at the stake after a prison term for writing a book criticizing the biblical interpretations of the Trinity. In 1579, Francis David was put to death or died in prison after being sentenced there for expressing Unitarian views after the Trinitarians took over. In 1942, Norman Čapek, who preached religious freedom, was sent to the Dachau concentration camp. Many of you might recognize him as the person who originated the flower communion in our Unitarian Universalist heritage. He was later gassed in the chambers. 1965, Viola Luiso and Reverend James Reeb are killed in Selma, Alabama. But courage is not reserved for those making enormous sacrifices. And courage is not reserved for those who need to be exceptionally brave. Thousands of UUs turned out in 2012 for Justice General Assembly. While dozens were arrested in acts of civil disobedience, even more acted in support of those, working behind the scenes doing public relations, making meals, and supporting the families of those who were arrested. And UUs have been showing up both literally and figuratively, attending coalition meetings, working with partner organizations to raise awareness, and use their privilege to lift up the voices of those who are not heard. In California, we passed the Trust Act and then the Truth Act, and just last year, the California Values Act. making California the first sanctuary state in our country. Now, from crossing cultural and racial comfort zones, working in accountable relationships with communities impacted by our unjust systems, and showing up time and time again when things seem hopeless, we can make differences if we overcome our fears. UU minister Reverend Leslie Takahashi writes, "Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is not feeling brave at every moment. Courage is being one who knows that fear is part of life and does not allow that fear to be the only part of life. Courage comes from the uniting of our own sense of strength and well-being with the sense of strength and well-being that comes from the care and commitment of others. Courage is not so much a characteristic as a daily choice." To stand up for our immigrant neighbors and live into beloved community, we must learn to go beyond our privilege and our comfort zone. Many times our courage is in letting go of our control. So often we find ourselves hung up by, ourselves. These obstacles create fear that we so often lack the courage to confront. There are three things that I see time and time again. Things we must find the courage to overcome in order to be effective in living out our faith. The first obstacle is independence. While we try really hard to look at things through the lens of interdependence, we frequently use the independent lens by mistake. It has been said that as UUs, we would rather shoot ourselves in both feet than work together. And how often do we find ourselves discussing how we can work on an issue, but only under certain conditions, only if we're in charge. And if we don't have it our way, we'll simply do it the way we know is better. This allows us to feel really good ourselves, but in a way that avoids interdependence and, in most cases, success. Secondly, and more frequently, we tend to put the need of consensus above our respect for the democratic process, somehow believing that holding everything up until we get everyone in agreement is less insulting to the democratic process than simply waiting for a majority or supermajority to agree. We stalemate ourselves into inaction. There's always more than one side, multiple perspectives, competing values. And as UUs, we affirm that diversity, but we cannot let it immobilize us. There will always be a way to rationalize a particular action or inaction. Surely the Southern police who aimed hoses at African American voters and released dogs and tear gas felt justified, just as the ICE agents that slashed the water bottles in the desert that are left for immigrants crossing the border feel justified. President Kennedy, who tried to dissuade Dr. King from amassing 250,000 African Americans at the Lincoln Memorial, who dragged his feet in enforcing civil rights legislation. Surely he had reasons too. As one writer said, we need to determine when our justifications and rationalizations serve our own interests or capitulate to our fears. Moral courage requires that kind of truth-telling. We can always find a cohort to camouflage our behavior. We can blend in with those who consume or condemn or collude in ways that comfort us, that fail to call us to fullness. We must each determine what forms the core of our decency. Thirdly and lastly, we can sometimes tend to think our ideals are the same as action. We are, after all, religious descendants of a long-standing liberal tradition, one that recognizes the inherent worth and dignity of the individual and applies critical reasoning to the issues of the day. That's a good thing. But as UU writer Paul Razor points out, our religious liberalism contains intrinsic challenges. In fact, many 19th century Unitarians embraced social Darwinism. According to Razor, this view had the practical effect of justifying the positions of those already in power. Razor adds that as religious liberals, we lack the language to speak about racism and other things as systemic evil because we lack a theology of evil. We prefer to focus on possibility and progress, our potential to do good, rather than exploring the depth of our capacity to perpetuate, collude, or idly witness evil. Paul Razor concludes, we liberals are often better at formality and abstraction than getting our hands dirty and our feet moving. We sincerely want things to be right in the world, but we also want them to be tidy. But there is hope. We have overcome all these obstacles in the past. Let us answer our call to stand with our immigrant neighbors. Let us say to ourselves, I can choose to be courageous in my response to the things of this world that cause me to be afraid. I can choose to act from love rather than act from fear. I can choose to honor my commitments rather than hide from those who would make me feel ashamed or threatened. I can choose to be a person full of joy and love, even when others around me are choosing to act from cowardice or fear of the unknown. I can find it in my heart to be gracious towards those who make their lives so small that they must try and reduce the size of other lives around them. My brave heart is my prayer for the world. My deep ask is that I know and see, recognize, and act from the courage that is part of me. The UU Justice Ministry of California is here to help with resources and community to support this work on immigration. Our Immigrant Justice Action Team has been hard at work for a number of years now. And I want to recognize that Lisa Diniakos is a leader in that community, and if you have any questions about it, please ask her. I'm here too, but you have a leader within your congregation that is very active in that team. Some of the resources I want to lift up briefly for you are the Regional Justice Training on April 14th at Studio City. You'll learn about Love Resists in both UUSC and URISE. The UU Refugee and Immigrant Services and Education will both be there. And it promises to bring you up to speed on what's going on nationally and the state level, as well as how you can be part of the solution. You can find out more at uujmca.org/RJT for Regional Justice Training. There are webinars and resources available on our website. Lisa played a leading role in putting those together, the UUJM Roundtable, and there are a couple that have been uploaded recently related to immigration. On May 14th, we invite you to Sacramento for Immigrant Day. I know not everybody can take off on a Monday and make it there, but we encourage you to join us. As people of faith, we have a responsibility to stand as a moral voice on the issues of immigration. It's an event that UUs have participated in along with more than 40 community-based organizations. And we'll be there to advance an agenda that seeks to stand up against the hateful policies of the federal administration and advance justice and equity for all. You can register at uujmca.org/Immigrant Day. And lastly, I want to invite you to join UUJM. There are membership forms both in the back, in the entryway there, and over in the fellowship hall. And you can just see me with those forms if you're interested. Our Immigrant Justice Action Team, as Lisa will tell you, is always looking for people to join in this work as well. You don't have to this is not something where you're clocking in 9 to 5. You don't have to be attending meetings all week or every week and every month. But if you're called to work on immigration, I encourage you to touch base with Lisa and explore opportunities that you can play a part, however small or large, that you feel comfortable with. Our immigrant neighbors have proven their courage in standing up for their families, their communities, and many times ours. As UUs, we have a responsibility to have the courage to stand up to oppression and seek to build beloved community. We are called to muster the courage to act. Thank you for joining in this work.